This is the Left of Center podcast with Rob Royce and Ben Knight.
Hey guys, welcome back. Welcome back, Rob.
Oh, thank you.
You guys are listening to the Left Center podcast. I am Ben Knight.
I'm Rob Royce.
And this is part 2 of the LaBouffe.
LaBouffe.
Or LaBouffe. I don't even know how you pronounce it, but...
Well, that was kind of the point of the title of the last podcast, wasn't it? It's like, which
one is it? Is it LaBouffe or LaBouffe? I think we said LaBouffe for most of the podcasts.
Well, I've always heard it as Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf.
But the thing that I was confused about was... Shai his first name, or was Shyla his first name? So I'd heard the name many, many times before I ever saw it printed. It was like, then it must be Shia LaBeouf.
Or maybe it's Shia LaBeouf, because it's spelled S-H-I-A. I guess I don't even know. I don't know.
Okay. Well, this podcast really doesn't have anything to do with Shia LaBeouf anymore.
Part 2 has nothing to do with Shia LaBeouf. We just talked so much during our mailbag segment that surprise, we never actually got to the meat of the podcast. So that's kind of what this is.
So it's actually we're actually doing part 2 of the mailbag segment of our Shia LaBeouf or LaBeouf podcast.
We should almost just call him like Carl Smith or something, just to make it easier. Like, this is the Carl Smith podcast, because it's like, is it Shia LaBeouf, Schumann? Carl. His name's Carl
You're
now.
Carl now.
I was going to call him up like, hey, Shia. He's like, what's up, dude? I'm like, hey, your name's Carl now. I'm like, I know it's a terrible name, but you're going to have to run with it, Carl.
We'll call it your Christian name, since evidently you're a Christian.
There you go. And actually, I just realized I just said Carl was a horrible name. So if we have any listeners that are named Carl, I just insulted them. I actually don't think Carl's a horrible name. I don't know where that came from.
It's kind of old-fashioned, maybe.
That could be.
I had a scuba diving instructor named Carl.
Really?
And he was a Jamaican man. And it's kind of interesting to hear a guy from Jamaica call himself Carl.
That's true. Like, it's like if you went somewhere, let's say you went to France and you were like, hi, my name's Rob. What's your name? He's like, Bill.
Right.
You're like, Bill?
Exactly.
Like, you're a French guy named Bill? That just sounds weird, you know?
I would have expected him to be called, like, Damien. I don't know.
Damien?
I don't know. It's just something maybe.
If we have
Damien?
We have French listeners out there. If you know someone named Damien, please, by all means, let us know.
No.
That's curious.
I'm just thinking something like Carl. Carl is like, I'm a farmer in the middle of Heartland, North America.
Yeah, because like there's a little kid named Carl on The Walking Dead who plays, like, he's like 14 or 13 or something. I was like, Carl, that's kind of interesting. Like, a little kid named Carl.
Older gentleman in the Bible study that I'm a part of on Tuesday mornings, who's named Carl, and he's a older gentleman in his 90s, and he's a farmer or something, some sort of
Carl. I like the name Carl.
I wouldn't expect a Jamaican scuba diving instructor to be named Carl, although he does have a nickname which totally fits, and they call him Sugar.
Sugar. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. Well, you know what? You've turned me around on the name Carl. I'm actually I'm a big fan of the name Carl. Well, before we get into the meats and stuff, I do want to just say real quick, and we've posted this a little bit on Twitter. Please, if you guys are listening to the podcast and you have an iTunes account, please go over to iTunes and leave us an awesome review.
Tell us whatever you think.
Yeah. And the thing is, the reason we're not doing it just to, bolster our egos or, just to make it seem like we're cooler than what we are. It's more just that the more good reviews and the more reviews that we get on iTunes actually makes this podcast more available to tons and tons and tons of more people. So it's not that we're trying to blow ourselves up. It's just like, well, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, we want other people to hear it as well.
If it's important to you, you can help us get the word out. Although, also the other side of review is not strictly so that we can be more successful as a podcast, but we actually have taken suggestions that whether you've sent us emails or whether you've chimed in by voicemail or something like that, we actually have made quite a few alterations to the way we're doing this podcast based on the things that many of you have said.
That's exactly right. I mean, we've gotten emails or Twitter direct messages or just posts or whatever, and people are just like, let me tell you why your podcast sucks. And like, all right, we'll take that into consideration. And in all honesty, some of the suggestions were actually very, very good. So, we just appreciate any feedback.
We're totally adapting suggestions and reviews, I guess. Just they're not all coming in on iTunes. So we've gotten a lot of feedback, not so much on iTunes. It would be fun because it's almost like when you get rewards points for buying airline tickets through a certain thing. It's like, all right, we'll get you get to have something other than just the thing that you were getting. You get these points. Reviews on iTunes is almost like that. It's like we get a elevated level of whatever exposure for having a certain amount or a certain type of reviews. So it would be nice if a lot of the things that we heard from all of you guys were on iTunes reviews. Even if it's not, even if it's not a 5-star review, go ahead and let us know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, we're not egotistical. Like, we realize that there are going to be some episodes where people are like, this is great, this is awesome.
I'm not egotistical.
Yeah, I might be a little egotistical, but
I am so humble.
You are the humblest guy I've ever met, for sure. But
I know.
And I just don't want to. I don't want to beat anybody over the head with it. But we'd appreciate you doing it just so we have a bigger audience that people, for the people that want to listen to this, they're made aware of it, and we can just get a little bit more exposure. But
in the meantime, we're plugging us.
Yeah, in the meantime, we're plugging us. So let's stop doing that. But since this is part 2, let's. What do you say we go ahead and get into the Reel with Rob?
Because that's what this is. Well, okay. Let's start Reel with Rob, and then I'll explain what it is we're doing.
There you go.
It's time to get real with Rob. It's time to get real with Rob.
Okay, the mailbag from, now it's 2 podcasts ago because last time we decided to roll with a special Halloween-y Scarecast.
I hate even to interrupt the Reel with Rob. Like, should we talk about the Halloween cast real quick? First of all, like, it's been, people are really liking it,
That's what I thought. I'm like, man, for a special event thing,
we've had a ton of downloads already, which it's been, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I did get a comment from Nate. Nate sent out a message to us and said, I've been listening to this podcast. I really like it. And one of the things I never thought I would ever hear Ben say on the podcast is, okay, I'm Kirk Cameron. And I was like, that's true. I never thought that I would ever say, okay, I'm Kirk Cameron. Rob, you're a guy yelling at Kirk Cameron. And away we go.
Right.
So, I mean, the Halloween cast was fun. I enjoyed it.
It was really, really great. But what it did, at least in the flow of our podcast continuity, is it interrupted what we said was going to be part 2. So we said, okay, next time we're going to tackle this other part of the LaBouffe podcast, and we didn't. We released the Halloween-y Scarecast instead. So here we are today talking about part 2 of LaBouffe, like we've said many times now. But what we're referring to...
Carl, not LaBouffe. Carl.
Sorry. See, it's difficult. We are responding to Kyle, who left a message on Twitter, and we ended that LaBouffe, the podcast, the Carlcast, with the question from Kyle. We interacted on it for quite a while, but nonetheless, we felt like, okay, we're kind of out of time here, for the sake of all y'all, but we're gonna make this another podcast. So here I ramble on, but here it is. The question from Kyle, I don't have it right here in front of me, but I remember it well enough to say, Kyle asked us on Twitter, what is the difference between watching violence in movies versus watching sex in movies? And kind of a couple of things that we touched on, and I'm going to try to do this just briefly. A couple of things that we touched on were how the violence is stylized, and it's obviously stylized. And I guess, we didn't touch on this, but is there any sort of moral dilemma regarding watching violence? Like, can you watch violence and say, well, I've done something sinful by watching it?
For me, I think it all comes down to conviction. I think that I know pastors who have no problem watching a rated R movie. Sure. They have no problem with violence or language, or because it's just not on their radar. Like, for them, it's just not. It doesn't affect them personally or spiritually, so it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Like, okay, well, I'm watching this really entertaining movie, but there is some murder and there's a lot of language, but I'm not really paying attention to the murder and language because that's not why I'm watching this.
It's not infiltrating your personal life or your mind in any way. But I mean, if you're a sensitive person to violence, like you like you watch violence in a movie or something like that, and then you're haunted for the next few days, like by what you saw. You might not be a good candidate for watching movies because it's done something to you psychologically. But that's probably not as common with violence, and for one thing, because stylized violence is obviously stylized, and like we said in the last time we were talking about this, that here you have the dramatic music welling up and everything goes into slow motion and the camera pans over to people's reaction as blood is splattering on their face, and you get this depiction that is obviously not reality.
No, I mean, it's a bunch of people that are playing pretend. I mean,
right. And whereas if you were actually to have seen a video, or if you actually see it in real life of real violence, there's something really haunting and hollow about seeing it for real, without the music, without the slow-mo, without the reaction from people, and it is a haunting, hollow feeling when you're actually seeing it for real. But even then, even when you see it for real and you feel haunted by it and you feel hollow because you're reflecting on what it is you saw, is there a moral violation? Is there a violation to your conscience in having seen it? Like, I wasn't supposed to see that. Or is it just more like, I'm not,
like I said, in a lot of ways, I think it's conviction. Like for me personally, and I'll throw this out there, and people can make fun of me. Like, I don't really watch scary movies because they literally scare me. Like whatever it is that quality is, like, like, oh, I love being scared. I don't have that.
Right.
And so I don't watch scary movies because it, it doesn't make me feel good, which I actually think that's more than a feeling. I think that is, from a spiritual standpoint, I do think that is some kind of conviction. Like God's like saying, hey, this makes you feel like crap, so don't watch it.
But would it be sinful to watch it and feel like deliberately
I think
if
you know in your mind, that's a complicated question, but I think to put it simpler, I think if you're let's say you're watching a movie that has a rape scene in it,
okay.
Horrible thing. Now, in your heart of hearts and in your mind, when you watch that sort of thing, you feel bad. You feel convicted, like,
sure.
oh, I shouldn't be watching this.
Right.
And if you do it anyway, I don't know. I think that maybe is going into, would that be considered a sin? Like if you really feel like you have a conviction toward that and you do it anyway.
Well, I kind of think about some movies that have stylized violence in it, and I guess I kind of wonder what the conviction, like what is the nature of the conviction when it comes to violence or language? What's the nature of it? What is it about it coming into your mind, the violence or the language coming into your ears, that would make it sinful to listen to? And where I'm going with this is, does watching violence in a movie, sorry, I'm banging my ring on the table, does violence in a movie infiltrate my mind in such a way that it takes my mind into becoming violent myself? Does it alter my thinking so that I am more prone, that it awakens in me a tendency to become more violent? I don't know of anyone that would need to steer clear from violence in a movie because it affects their tendency to do that. I know that it might fall into the same category as, like, if you feel at liberty to have a glass of wine or a glass of beer, but you're sitting across from somebody who is a recovering alcoholic, it would be unwise to do that. And
you're actually sinning in that you might cause them to stumble.
You're not being sensitive to how your actions and how your freedom and flexibility with this substance might actually cause somebody else, in their mind, they've already, long before they actually take a drink themselves, to watch you drink it, is it entering into their mind? Is it starting a struggle inside of them to that they have to fight or something like that because you've exposed it? So I don't know. I don't think violence in movies is that sort of thing.
I don't know. In some ways, I think it might be, and you hear about this all the time. Well, this kid was playing Grand Theft Auto 7, and that's why he committed this murder or this crime. And I'm like, I just don't think.
Well, but let's go back on that one. Like, okay, a movie or TV show is something that you observe, but Grand Theft Auto and video games like that are something that you actually interact with.
It's true. So there might be something. Okay, so we'll go back to movies then and say, okay, well, you watch the newest rated R movie from Samuel L. Jackson or something. Well, Samuel L. Jackson, he's going to use the F word at least a few times. He has to.
I'm surprised that there wasn't F words in The Incredibles because Samuel L. Jackson was in it.
Where is my effing super suit?
I was thinking exactly the same line.
And so
mother.
yeah, exactly. And so, so let's say you're watching this movie. Now, for me, watching that movie is not going to make me like when I get done watching. I'm not in my headspace. I'm not going to be like, okay, well, from now on, I'm going to start using the F word because I just watched this movie, or it's not going to cause me to do it.
And it does. I would say that there's a lot less of a moral template around language than there is around violence. Like if you watch Pulp Fiction and Samuel L. Jackson's quoting Bible and shooting people, and it's actually murderous, it's not self-defense and things like that, but he's shooting people, and you have a tendency to follow Samuel L. Jackson in that course of action versus language. I think that you're safer using Samuel L. Jackson's language than his method of dealing with people. Not that, if you're in sin, the way God sees it, there really isn't you've broken the law of God in this way, and that makes you a worse sinner than the other. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about what sort of, we could say there's a severity to different wickednesses. Like, just because we're wicked as sinners doesn't mean that we're prone to do the most possible wicked. It just means that we have a 100% tendency to do wicked in all the things that we do. That if there's righteousness and there's wickedness, we do wickedness. We don't do all the wickedness that we could, but it's wicked. So in the realm of that thinking, would it be safer to stumble by taking on Samuel L. Jackson's linguistic characteristics in Pulp Fiction,
or his violent
characteristics? It's safer to you can be. There's fewer consequences. It's a less of an offense to mankind and to the soul, to your own conscience, to use his language than his
gun.
Well, so that's kind of where I'm going with it. Is that okay? So watching a movie, you hear a bunch of F words, you're desensitized to F words. You watch a movie, you with a lot of violence, and you're desensitized to violence. Does that mean you're going to use violence?
No, I don't think so. For me, and I think this has been an age-old question where people are like, okay, well, this kid committed a murder. Well, was it because he, obviously he watched all these movies that, this is what caused his, and I don't think that's it might be a very small part of it. There was already something there.
Right.
That, maybe this, because he listened to this music or watched these movies or whatever, maybe that just amplified or brought it up to another level possibly. But I don't think that you can say a movie or a song or whatever was the cause of something like that.
There is a major, the bad language you're hearing in a movie is a real bad word. They're not using a stylized version of an F word.
This is the fancy way to say the F word.
Right. They're not using a glamorized, F word that's full of special effects that gives you the different impression of the F word than if you were to use it in real life. It's the same word. Violence is something completely different. Unless they're filming real violence, I don't think. Well,
there's a difference between somebody slapping another person in the face in a movie and anything in the movie Seven, or something like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and even you get an old movie like Rocky, the boxing movies, you watch a boxing match on TV, and there's obviously, if Rocky was real, both those men would be dead. Oh, they're not really. So you understand that this isn't. My point is, you understand that this isn't real. You're not going to go get into. Maybe it did inspire a bunch of people to get into boxing because they wanted to hit people the way Rocky hit people, and they'll find out pretty quick. Oh, that's not realistic at all. For one, I can't take that kind of hit over and over and over Rocky can. Well, there was deliver that kind of hit.
There was a bunch of Beavis and Butthead copycats that was come on, dude, let's just go out in the air, just hit me as hard as you can. And the dude one kid gets hit and he just falls on the ground.
You'll find out pretty quick that stylized violence is far from reality. And if you want stylized violence to happen to you like that, you'll change your mind pretty quick.
And it probably makes people feel like babies or something, because it's like, you see these two men on, Apollo Creed and Rocky just beating the crap out of one another, and then like after you're done watching the movie, you're walking down the hall and you stub your toe, like, ow man, that really hurt.
Really hurt.
And you're like, wow, what a pansy I am. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Like if you were to get hit like these guys are getting hit, I mean, it's one of them would have been done.
It just and any sort of violence. That's kind of where I'm going with this, is that when you see the stylized violence and it comes into your mind, it's not coming into your mind in a real way. You identify the stylizedness of it. The F word comes in your mind, and you recognize it as it's his actual real everyday word. So here we're talking today, getting real with me, is to talk about. Why is violence in movies? Is it correct to depict a violent scene in a movie? We could probably debate about that, but I'm just, it is part of the reality that they're trying to portray in a movie, and whether it's sinful to watch a stylized version of a violent act in a movie, does it create an environment and take you into that environment in a way that you interact with it, like Grand Theft Auto or a third person or first person shooter game might? Are you interacting with that realm in any way, or is it just, are you strictly observing it? I'm going to say that with stylized violence, we're strictly observing it. And
I'll go on. I'll be the guy to play devil's advocate here. Now, when you watch a certain movie, like for me, it's because I'm a big giant baby. I can watch like a girly movie, and it'll make me tear up. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, oh, this is really, like you watch The Notebook, and I'm like, oh man, this is sad. Now to me, that is interaction. Like you're not interacting with the characters necessarily, but an emotional string has been tapped because you're reacting to what you're seeing. So there is some sort of interaction there. Maybe it's just more of a reaction than anything. Like you're reacting to what's on the screen. But I don't know. Is that kind of an interaction?
You're being affected, and I think stylized violence, harsh language, and things like that are, I guess we could put it in the realm of you're interacting with these movies in that way, but are you interacting in a way? Because we're talking about whether it be sinful. Are you interacting in a way that's contrary to, like, are you experiencing something when you watch violence? Are you experiencing something when you watch something moving? Are you experiencing these in a way, having a reaction to and interacting with this movie in a way that's contrary to contrary to the will of God, His revealed will in terms of what we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to be? This might be obvious where I'm going with it, because here the question was, what about watching sex in movies? Okay, so when they put a scene of sexuality in the movie, the violence is stylized, the sexuality might be stylized, but are you interacting with the movie? Do you have a reaction to sex on screen? And what is it? What is the reaction?
Let's make it awkward really fast here. So I would have to say yes, it is entirely interactive in that if you're a male, and some females, if you're a male and you're watching any sort of pornographic scene, or even just sexualized scene, there might be an area where you're like where masturbation might come in or something like that.
So there's the potential for a physiological reaction. Physiological, as in you've seen something depicted in a movie that gives you a physiological reaction. Now this is very different. Because of the design of us, our human design, because of the design and intent of the movie maker. That when they film violence and they depict violence, they might be looking for a strictly psychological reaction to, and there are movies that, one, they don't really depict enough of it for you to get the shock value of what really happened. Like you watch movies from the 50s and you say, well, that, if they're trying to depict a famous, like if they try to depict the OK Corral shooting in Tombstone, Arizona or whatever, and they, some guy, if they depict it, they don't show it. I don't know how to best describe this, but like the way that they would show that scene would be very different than they'd show it today. And so you could say, well, the one in the 50s didn't really give me that much of a sense of how intense that situation might have been. Whereas you go to the movie Tombstone from the early 90s, it's like you actually did a really good job bringing out the intensity of that situation. And one of the ways they do that is to show actually how violent that actually was. And so they're depicting a reality, but the intent is to depict it realistically. When somebody gets shot, they don't just clutch their chest and fall over in some pathetic way and,
no, there's blood spouting, there's organs on the ground. I mean, and I think an interesting thing with, with the sexuality and things like that, if you watch like an old 80s comedy, people are like, this is one of the greatest comedies ever made. Now there was, or even horror movies, there was a set metric. Like they knew exactly what they wanted to do. Okay, we need to kill this amount of people. There has to be at least 3 sex scenes. There has to be this. Like that. I mean, you watch any old 80s horror flick, it's almost, they're almost identical as far as like, okay, well, we've got these group of kids or these group of people and they're out in the woods or they're in a cabin or they're here. And then we're going to have our killer who just kind of shows up for a second. And then we go back to the kids and they're having sex. And then, of course, the killer doesn't like that, so he kills them. And then for some reason, I never understood this. If you watch an old, and I don't like these movies anyway, but if you watch like an old Friday the 13th or something, like that's how every one of them is. It's just like, and I'm trying to figure out like, okay, why are like these 6 group of kids, why do they feel like they're just hanging out and they're just having fun, they're just talking, all of a sudden they're all just like, we should all have sex at the same time. And it's just like, and of course, the killer goes through it. I'm just like, and again, with the 80s comedies, there was a metric. There was like, this is how we're going to do it. Okay, the first 20 minutes, we're going to introduce our characters. We're going to have this.
Every life is perfect.
And then we're going to have like this next scene, like for no reason, we're just going to have gratuitous nudity because we just know that the kids are going to be coming to see this are going to be, the majority of them are going to be boys from like 16 to 28 or something, whatever. And, boys like to see naked women. So this is where we have to put this in. So I think there was just that, it had to be this way. This was the metric. This is the way we're going to make the movie. But now, if you watch those movies, it's almost silly to see nudity in old movies. It just seems silly to me. Like it's less titillating, if you want to use that word, as it is just kind of, it seems goofy to me. It's just like, it's funny. It's like
of course
it's like,
they would do that.
Yeah, of course they would do that, where now it's more like, we use the word stylized. I mean, it's way more, and this is going to sound dumb, but the nudity is more realistic now. It's more like, but it's not. Actually, I'm going to,
you're right, because that was kind of the point, is that the person in the 80s, the cheap and ridiculous movie from the 80s, horror movie from the 80s, the lady's actually there with, she's actually exposing herself, and here we are actually viewing her. But I think I know what you mean, is that the intrigue that's put into the plot that creates the scene actually is out of a more realistic life sequence.
Well, yeah, I mean, now it would be like, okay, well, now the nudity is, okay, well, these 2 people are married and, just one night they're going to have sex. Well, that makes sense to me. They're married. Of course they're going to have sex, like that's, but it's more, to me, that's more realistic. Where in the 80s, it's just like, hey, we're just going to get naked for no reason. It's like,
part of the reason why I would reject nudity in movies based on it being a depiction of reality is because unless there's something different about you, and I want to say different, and I would go so far as to say wrong with you, but I don't want to take the time to explain why, so I'm just going to say different for now. But unless there's something different about you, chances are any time that you're naked, you're not in front of people. Anytime that you're in an intimate moment with your spouse, you're not in front of people. You're not doing it in front of people. There aren't people watching. So okay, stylized violence, if there's people in the scene that, violence can happen in front of people, happens in front of people all the time. F words happen in front of people. In fact, majority of them are probably said about someone, to someone, and directed to people. But these are realities that happen in view of other people. But sexuality is actually something that's it's innate. It's inherent to our nature that it's actually private. And so And so when a movie says, hey, we're going to make this as realistic as possible because for some reason people deserve to see the realistic interaction that involves sexuality and nudity. Well, there's nothing in our real life experience, if you're normal or if you're biblical about your interactions with your spouse and other people regarding that interaction, we're not typically invited into sexual interaction with other people or even private. I shouldn't even say, because there's a big difference between just strictly nudity and sexuality. There's a difference, but you're not, let's just call it private. You're not typically invited into the people's private lives that way.
That's exactly it. Like, we'll take it out of the realm of sexuality and just say nudity, and we'll say, if you were just look at nude pictures on the internet and stuff like that, the equivalent of what that actually is if you just walked over to any person's random house and just looked in their window and they were walking around naked. Like, that person obviously doesn't want you looking at them. And it really is the same thing. I mean, it's just set up in a different, you're watching it on TV as opposed to real life, but it really is the same thing.
It really is. Now, you could make the argument that, but the person who's getting their picture taken for this picture is willing to do that. And we've had this kind of conversation with some people on Twitter before, as to how, what is it? Is there something in people that just want to show, or are they actually reacting to a proposition in which they get a payoff? And so we can have a conversation about that later. But right now, the difference between stylized violence and nudity or sexuality in movie, and try to get to the bottom of Kyle's. Maybe we'll never get to the bottom of Kyle's question. But I thought it'd be really interesting to set up the rest of this podcast anyway with starting out with Kyle again, and I think it really boils down to what we're being invited to see by the movie maker and why. When is the intent, and maybe some directors don't intend this. Maybe they do have some sort of dedication to just portraying the reality, and that's why they put nudity and sex on the screen. But I'm not sure I'd believe that, because there's a psychological and physiological reaction to seeing sexuality. We're being invited into an environment to interact with another person or a couple or a situation that has more than just an entertainment quality to it. It has more than just a shock value to it. It has more than just, stylized, or it's more than just intrigue. Because let's just put this in the context of depicting a reality versus depicting sexuality or the actual nudity of it. The nudity is real. That's kind of the point. The nudity is real. Violence is not. But let's say you have a scene and to be true to a story, maybe it's a real life story. To be true to the story, the two people involved in the story actually do end up in an intimate situation. Now, let's say that they're having dinner together, and in the story, it's necessary, especially if it's necessary to the story, that these two people end up intimate with each other. Maybe the story indicates that they're going to have a child together or something like that. So this is something that between point A and point Z, certain things had to happen, and intimacy with each other is one of them. Could you make sure that the audience knows that happened without nudity and without
I think you
sexuality?
absolutely can. You can do, and movies do it all the time. I shouldn't say all the time, but I've watched several movies where, even if you have to show them having sex, like, first of all, cover them up. Like, if you have to
show it,
you don't have to. But what I'm saying is, like, if you as a director feel like you have to have that scene, it has to be in there. Now, I would argue it does not have to be in there.
I would say so too. There's clever ways to make it look like it was obvious. Like you could even have a scene in a lot of movies, and I don't really, at least I've never thought about having a problem with this before. Maybe whether I should or not is worth questioning. But I've never had a problem like when when something leads up to something and nothing is ever shown and no sexuality depicted, but you see the couple, they're laying in bed and they both got the covers pulled all the way up to their chin, and the actor and actress could be fully dressed for all you know. You're only seeing their heads and their hands, and they're talking in the aftermath of whatever it is that happened. Now, unless I'm missing something within my conscience, I don't have a problem with that being depicted that way. You could even add intrigue. I'm going to make the argument that you could add intrigue into, like you could do, let's say go back to the scene, they're having dinner, and you could raise the intensity of their interaction at dinner where you could be invited in even to as a viewer into the intrigue of their conversation, knowing exactly where this is going to go, and whatever it is that the movie maker intends for you to feel between these two, you're completely getting that, and then end scene. Next scene moves on. Maybe it's the one where they've got the covers pulled up to their chin.
Well, and I've seen several movies where, like, you see the two people and they start kissing, and then they pan over to like a window where, like, the breeze is blowing through and blowing the curtains, and so
right.
and so they intimate that yes, this
something's happening. In a bedroom.
They give you a wink. They're like, what's going to happen, and then they come back and you didn't have to see any nudity,
right? And I would say there is no moral dilemma regarding whether or not you understand that this is something that happens in the story. We even have that in the Bible. In fact, the Bible goes into some pretty strong detail concerning some of these sorts of things. Yet, if you were to make a movie of some of these scenes in the Bible, based on Hollywood standards today, you'd have to include scenes with nudity and sex.
And some of them would even be like NC-17 kind of ratings.
Right.
Some of it.
Right. And so we get these descriptions but the descriptions in the Bible are always something that we're supposed to know about the situation. They're always good for instruction in how to understand what was going on and why it's in the Bible. And all those things are there for us in the Bible, but that's not, I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say that. I don't think that's why it's depicted that way in movies. Why, when they could intimate?
Yes.
They could intimate intimate scenes.
I know it sounds weird, doesn't it?
I don't know if that's the right word.
I think it's
indicate. I don't know. Why do they put that? Why do they go all in on a scene like that, or go that far when they could? They could let us know what's going on. So what's the motive for bringing us into the bedroom? What's the motive for bringing us in full view of?
For me, it's more eyeballs. I don't think it has anything to do with. And I think when you're making a movie, obviously you want to make money. Movies cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to make. You want to be able to, you want to have career longevity. You want to be able to make movies and make this your career. And like, okay, well, how can I get more eyeballs? What's going to get more eyeballs in here? Well, obviously nudity. Or sexuality. That's a big one.
Think so? I mean, is that actually going to sell a movie ticket?
I think for a certain audience, you're absolutely going to sell a video ticket, a movie ticket. Like, American Pie is a perfect example. Like the American Pie movies, those were movies that were made specifically for the audience that was 18 to 25 around the year 2000. Like that's who that was marketed for. We're going to make this R-rated high school comedy that were like, high school comedies in the, 80s and 90s. And this is for your generation. This is your R-rated comedy. And so that's who it was for. And so I think, now when you make, like we were talking about The Notebook earlier, like The Notebook was for a very specific audience. Like it wasn't for,
I'll go with that here and just say that no matter what you're making in a movie, no matter what kind of content you're putting in a movie, you're making that movie in order to elicit a reaction. Now, even the movie Noah, that Darren Aronofsky, he designed the story of that movie to elicit a reaction.
And he got a reaction from me, believe me.
He sure did. And that's probably what his intention was. So okay, let's go with American Pie. They make American Pie for this, or half a generation ago, our generations. This is your coming of age high school movie, and so they designed the movie to elicit a reaction from us, they make the notebook to elicit a reaction from us. And so what's the reaction? Going back to Pulp Fiction, okay, you have a reaction when you hear an F word. You have a reaction when you see Samuel L. Jackson shooting everybody up. You have a reaction when you see nudity or sexuality depicted in a movie. And so the question on all three of those would be, well, what is the reaction? And does the reaction that they're eliciting, that you're willingly subjecting yourself to get, does this defy the revealed will of God for you in your life?
And I think that for the most part, well, I mean, does watching a movie bring honor to God? Well, I would say the majority of the movies, no. I mean, it's more for just, it's because you're why are you watching a movie? You're watching it to entertain yourself, for an hour or two or three or whatever. So I don't think that watching a movie is even glorifying God, even if it's a movie like God is Dead. Now if you watch it with the
dead? God's not dead, you mean?
God's not dead. Is that what I said?
You said God is dead.
Oh, sorry. God's not dead. Whew. No, I think when you watch something like that, now if you're watching it with the intent, the purpose of you watching it is because you want to watch a program that is going to be uplifting and, in line with your faith, things like that, then yeah, I think that maybe is glorifying to God. But I mean, just watching any movie or TV show, I don't think that watching an episode of Friends is glorifying to God. But I don't think it's a slight against God either.
Well, I mean, I can't think of anywhere in the Bible where we're commanded to entertain ourselves. Practice hospitality is something that we're told to do, and so to entertain others, I guess in a sense, have a good time, have a refreshing time, bring people into a joyful experience, and it's really tough to know whether or not that's something that watching movies or TV show does for us or for others. The Bible does say that whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or anything, do all to the glory of God. That should be the litmus test we always use for ourselves, regardless of what it is. Hey, I'm going to go to the football game. And, well, does that bring glory to God? It's like, it's not that the football game brings glory to God or not. Do I bring glory to God? Is there something about me at the football game that makes Jesus Christ look like he's the Lord of my life? Is there something about me at the supermarket that makes it clear to anybody who interacts with me, that I interact with, that Jesus Christ is the Lord of my life in such a way that reveals him as glorious, a glorious reality? Is there anything about me in the movie that I go and watch? Is there something about me? And I guess one way to look at it, this is at least my version of that. My deliberate attempt to do that. I brought my youth group to see the movie Noah, and knowing from what I'd read about it that the movie Noah wasn't going to be in any way, shape, or form a depiction of what the Bible says about Noah. Most of what we read about Noah, what the Bible helps us to see about Noah, isn't written in Genesis. It's written in other places in the Bible, like Hebrews, for instance. And so, and also taking some other parts in the Bible that help us understand what's important about Noah's story. So I take a group of, I think we were over 20 young people to this Noah movie, and I just used an opportunity before we ever got off the bus to explain, all right, guys, just so you know, the Bible has these things to say about Noah. And what you're going to see on the screen is just a stylized version. It's one man's version, his version of the story, telling his story for his own reasons. And he's trying to point something out about the story of Noah that the Bible might not necessarily be trying to point out. But I want you to know that what's important to know about Noah is this. And let this man's imagination about the actual sequence of events and what it might have looked like for the earth to get flooded and what it might have looked like to have an ark full of animals, let those things be useful in your imagination as you think of the story, but guard your hearts and your minds against what a man might try to do to shake your understanding of God's word in regards to it. And so maybe that's just an example of how, okay, I go to see this movie, I'm going to go to be entertained for a little while or not, depending on what you think of that movie. But I wanted the group that I went with to understand that God is worth glorifying, that God's name and his honor might be offended in the way that the story is told, and that it's okay to actually be offended for God's sake. Now that's a pretty explicit example. Like here we're talking about a movie made about a Bible event, and being mistreated, a mistreatment of God, a mistreatment of his story here. But we can look at any movie like that. If I laugh at that joke, does that bring honor and glory to God, or does it distinctly not? Am I going against the nature and revealed will of God by identifying myself with the comedy of that joke? Am I going against God's nature, his revealed will, when I allow that scene to elicit that kind of response from me? And so we're going to bring a guest on here in just a couple moments to help us understand a little bit more about what our culture, the media in our culture, and what Hollywood might be trying to do deliberately or even incidentally. But just to close out the mailbag from the LaBouffe podcast, to answer Kyle's question, hopefully we've answered it, Kyle, that the difference between stylized violence that you watch on TV or in movies and nudity and sexuality is that it elicits a reaction from us. By watching it, we allow ourselves to have a reaction elicited from us that is contrary to God's nature, and it's contrary to his revealed will for us.
Well, what's really interesting to me is that, Darren Aronofsky did not have the reaction for you or for me for that matter, that we'd have liked to see. But that is an example of taking something that is clearly not something that is glorifying God, but using it to glorify God, in that saying, like you said, take the things that you can see on here, like, what would it look like if the world were to be flooded? Like, get a visualization of what this actually would look like. I mean, it literally is water destroying the earth.
Right.
And so, they can take that and go, oh, wow, when I read this, that's what that means. But then, again, keep your heart guarded in that, this is obviously not, nowhere in the Bible does it say that Noah did this, or that one of Noah's family did this, or,
Or even just the purpose behind why the ark was built. He had it all. And it's safe to say that he was going at it. He was not attempting to tell the Bible's story in the way that he made that movie. He was actually trying to say something else, and we can get into that another time. But I think the importance of it is to see, is our reaction to, even Aronofsky, is our reaction to this movie, is the reaction that it elicits within God's, is it honoring God in his nature and his revealed will? And I think that in this case, I think something like that, it would honor God when the word of God, when God himself means so much to us that we find ourselves offended for his sake. I think anytime that we can do that and be within a biblical parameter in the way that we react, like it would be wrong to hunt down Aronofsky and shoot him. That would be an overreaction to defend the name and honor of God in this particular case, probably. But a correct reaction would be to anybody who we know of that has seen the movie, that we might be in a position in their life to be influential in their life. Like, for instance, me with the 20-some young people from my youth group, happen to find myself in a position where I have the opportunity to influence their thinking in regards to the movie. And so what I want to do with my influence is honor God, honor his word, take the name and honor of God seriously enough to say something about how this movie offends it.
Yeah, and actually, I want to thank Darren Aronofsky, because he actually kept me from wasting my money at the box office. So for that, I'm actually very thankful.
You didn't go?
I did not go see it in theaters because I just had a feeling like, and I wanted to pull this up real quick while we were talking. I can't believe it has such a high rating on, for anybody who, like, if you're interested in movies and you want to know box office stuff and just reviews and blah, blah, blah.
6.6 out of 10.
Rotten Tomatoes actually has it at 77%, which is pretty good on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm amazed by that. But I think the reason that it's because of, first of all, you can't deny one thing. You cannot deny. We talked about Michael Bay on the last podcast.
Yeah.
Love him or hate him, he does amazing visual work. Darren Aronofsky, while
the visuals were incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciated a lot of the imagination. Like I've thought for a long time. This is a tangent, but I've thought for a long time, what would the word is post-diluvian, which means pre-flood. What would what did I say post-diluvian? Antediluvian, meaning pre-flood. Antediluvian. What would the antediluvian world look like? And one of the ways I really appreciated the imagination that went into this is when Noah looked into the sky, even though it was daylight, he saw stars, like as many stars as we see at night. And it identifies one thing, kind of a debated concept, but nonetheless a concept that there was a water vapor canopy around the earth, and that when it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, that was the collapsing of a water vapor canopy that was once in orbit, part of our atmosphere or something, just real water up there somewhere suspended in space above us, and that collapsed, causing all the rain. Well, they did imagine what would that have been like. It might have magnified the heavenly skies so that even during the day you could see the stars. I appreciated that.
Yeah, and I think that's cool. And I think that's why a lot of people were like, "This is a great movie." Like, no. That's why it's visually interesting.
That's why it's an interesting movie. I never said it wasn't an interesting movie.
So, but we'll jump off of Darren Aronofsky because I don't want to rip on him too much anyway. But like Rob said, we do have our guest Stephanie, who will be on in just mere seconds, and we're going to kind of get back into the debate of as far as Hollywood goes, with the violence and sexuality and how it's depicted, through the eyes of directors and actors and actresses and just how we react to it.
Well, and the reactions they're trying to elicit. We'll get into this with Stephanie and see what she has to say.
Absolutely. So let's see if we can get to our guest here.
Welcome to Hollywood. Quick money, fine women, fast cars. Welcome to Hollywood. So you want
Well, first of all, can you let us know a little bit, let our listeners know a little bit about who you are and how we got in touch?
Yeah. Well, my name is Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from Greece. I
Really?
moved to the U.S. about 7 years ago, and I went to college here. I went to grad school. I got married. I created a production company. Now I live in LA, and I'm working as an actor, as a producer. I do some plus size modeling and some voiceovers, but in general, producing and acting is kind of what I do. And I'm running a campaign lately, and I've been on Twitter like a mad person, tweeting like crazy. And you guys reached out to me, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of got to retweet some of your things and kind of get to know who you are. And, here we are.
Nice.
Yeah. Like she said, we're awesome. No, not at all. We just, like I said, we reached out and you kind of reached back and, we've been trying to do, this is kind of a part two. We started talking about the actor, Shia LaBeouf, in the last podcast, or actually this is
second to last
podcast. We actually call him Carl now.
Okay.
Because we don't know if his name is Shia LaBeouf or Shia LaBeouf
or Shy or Shia.
Yeah. So we just easier. We're just like Carl.
Okay.
So
that works.
So Carl, we're talking about Carl, because he is an actor in Hollywood, and
Yes.
perhaps we read and we talked about he has apparently become a Christian,
right?
and so we kind of talked about that, and you yourself being of that same ilk, and you are also in the industry, as it were. We just thought it would be interesting to sit down and talk with you about specifics, which I will actually let Rob bring up.
Sure. Well, I mean, here we ended up getting an email from a Twitter message from a guy named Kyle, and he had asked the question, what's the difference between watching violence in movies and watching sex in movies? And so far we've actually spent quite a bit of time in this podcast talking about that exact thing. But we wanted to get your take as somebody who's breaking into the business.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk to you about just kind of the tone that's being set. Here we have obvious evidence in Hollywood that family-friendly movies sell.
Yeah.
Like I think when Avengers came out and when Iron Man 2 came out, these movies are relatively, they're action-packed. You could even say, wow, they're actually really quite violent. But the reality is that there's a fantasy type of stylized violence that I've got kids who are 10, 12 years old, and I let them watch some of these movies, sometimes even unsupervised. And so here, even though we have distinctive proof that these kind of movies outsell just about any other kind of movie of any other genre, it's difficult to find actresses in particular who have not at some point in their career made it a point to exploit or give in to the exploitation of themselves in a sexual way. And so we wanted to kind of get your take as someone who's breaking into the modeling industry and the acting business. Can you help us and our listeners understand the pressure on people like yourself, fashion models and whatnot, to allow the market to exploit you sexually?
There is a huge pressure. This side of the world is insane. Even ever since I moved to Los Angeles, it's a whole different continent. It's a whole different world. I mean, sex is everywhere. Driving down Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, it's all you see, and it's all what is expected. I was even reading an article the other day about investors only willing to invest in a movie if you would have had sex. Who was it? My goodness, it was a famous actor, and he said, "I refused." He said, "I refused because that movie didn't need that. It didn't need to tell that kind of story." But yeah, you mentioned violence, and you mentioned those specific movies, Avengers and Iron Man, and kind of family-friendly movies. The difference between that and the rest of the movies that have violence is the blood and gore. And there's a difference in that kind of violence, and then there's a difference in the kind of stunts and flipping over cars violence. You know what I mean? So there's those different kind of worlds. When it comes to sex, though, there really is not. There is a limit in between a romantic scene and a sex scene, and we lost that side in Hollywood. We completely lost. You see the contracts I'm getting for roles, and you see the breakdowns I'm looking at every day, either submitting myself, or I was working at an agency for a while I was in grad school about 6 or 7 months ago, and I'm looking at the breakdowns that come in, even for just commercials, and the way they phrase they define the line between romance and sexuality are blurring. Hollywood has lost sight of what that is, and I think that in their mind they're catering to their audience, and the problem is that the audience that's asking for that is the audience that's, phrasing it nicely, is an audience living in lust. I can't go through those breakdowns without honestly having to decipher words to make sure what they mean. For instance, without giving a whole lot of away, last week I went in for a major television show, and I'm reading the breakdown from my agent, and the description says, sultry, manipulating, sexy Greek politician. Now, in translation, sultry means there's a lot of chest, because that's what the contract is going to require. When it comes to manipulative, it means there's a lot of sex scenes. Not necessarily sex scenes. There's kissing scenes that the point is to lead to that. Does that make sense? So you have to translate every single breakdown and take those little words and translate them into what they're supposed to mean. The pressure is intense. And I've noticed that in student films as well. It's insane. I'm looking through breakdowns, and as a new actor breaking in, especially people that don't have an agent. I have an agent, so I don't get to have to do all that all the time. But people that don't have agents, they're scrolling through student breakdowns. They're scrolling through kind of indie film breakdowns, and I'm gonna tell you, 1 out of 3 has that definition: sexy, sultry, or I hear the busty a lot as well.
And see, that's really interesting, because what we were kind of discussing beforehand is, there is a difference between sex and violence in movies and television, in that, for us, from Robin and mine's perspective, violence is very stylized. They make it seem more entertaining, or, somebody gets shot, it's just like they get shot, they grab their chest, they fall down and go, but in all reality, it's so different in life. But with sex, regardless of whether it's on a movie, a television show, or in real life, it's real. Like you're looking at people.
Well, and there's certainly some stylization to it, like women who come on to men in a movie. It's like you don't experience that. Well, at least most of us don't experience that every day. But they're depicting a reality that psychologically we identify with it a lot more than we would identify with a violent scene.
Yes. Also, kind of being on behind the scenes, when it comes to a violent scene, there's a stunt coordinator on set, okay? So let's just say, for instance, there is a punch. You never actually put your knuckles on somebody else's face. It's a cheat. The camera tells the story without you having to do anything. When it comes to sex, your lips are gonna touch the other person's lips, and your hands are gonna touch the other person's body. It's an actual physical content, and it's an actual physical contact that you can't avoid. And we're human beings. We are aroused by what we see. The Bible even says it, careful what you see, what your eyes put, what you put your eyes on, or what your mind, because we're visual people. We are physical people. We sense and we feel through touch. And in violence, you can avoid that in movies. From 5 miles away, a sniper can shoot and kill somebody. You won't even see the blood. The bullet won't even go through. And that person died. The way it's stylized in the movie. When it comes to sex, and even not even just sex going all the way to that line, going all the way to the end of the limit, just the kissing, just the harassment, even the flirting in movies needs a physical touch, which you're stepping over boundaries, and I mean, I'm married and my husband is a preacher, which is another whole element in this industry. Oh, trust me, I got questions from my agents on that. It's like, is your husband going to be okay with that? I'm like, well, it depends what you're asking.
Right.
Well, and that actually makes me want to ask a question about, you read these scripts and, is there a certain amount of pushback that, I shouldn't say that you're allowed to give and say, well, look, I read the breakdown, it says here, this, and this. Now I know what it actually means is this, and this, as you explained. Is there a certain amount that you can kind of push back and say, well, I'm willing to do this, I'm not willing to do this, and when you do that, is there an automatic, okay, well, we're going to find somebody else?
Yes, there is. For instance, scrolling through that the breakdown the other day about that big show, my husband and I both knew it was a big role. It was a $30,000 an episode role. It was a big opportunity for me, and it was an opportunity that kind of fell in my lap. I didn't even chase it. And we were just in prayer for it, because when I saw the breakdown and then I read the script, the first scene was a bikini scene in a pool. And there was no physical contact. I didn't touch, he didn't touch. There was nothing physical contact about it, but it was a very manipulative, flirtatious scene. I was supposed to be in a bikini, Well, long story short, looking at the script and looking at the breakdown, I realized that the character was depicted as a bad character. And she paid the price of her behavior. And even when she was going in for the kiss, like the other actor was playing a lawyer, and he was a high power married lawyer with children. So my character was trying to break into somebody's marriage. She was paying the price for that. In every scene, she was losing. She was losing ground. And I realized that as long as the script did not require me to take my clothes off, did not require to do actual sex scenes, it was a bikini, it was a sultry, it was a kissing, it was whatever, she paid the price. So yeah, I see the breakdown, and I'm looking, and I understand what the breakdown says, and I know what they're going to be looking for. As long as it's not in my contract, I know that they're not going to ask for specific things. And then being on set and then looking at the script and know where the story is going, I can look at it and say, okay, so the audience is going to read and understand that whatever she's doing is not leading to a better behavior. It's not leading her into a winning kind of, you're doing good, you go for it. You know what I mean? So the way the character is read and translated into the audience is important to me. And that's how I can go through and say yes, no, maybe.
There's there was a British TV series. It was a mini series. Like they made 4 or 5 movies. It had Benedict, what's his name in
Cumberbatch?
it? Yeah. Anyway, I've been kind of lamenting lately, and it goes along with what you're saying, how how these kind of interactions between, you know, in the storyline, what is it, how is it depicted? And I just to underline what you're saying as a contrast, this movie series, this miniseries ended with Benedict leaving his wife, who didn't appreciate him, for this lady who had always appreciated him. And this TV show is portraying adultery, this adulterous relationship, because they did have an adulterous relationship. It depicted it as a sweet thing, as a victory, as a, you know, the human, you know, a victory of the human spirit, and how love can still find us. And I just had to say that, you know, and my wife and I are watching this, and I'm all, I'm speaking my mind as I'm like, and
It's
she's
all right
like, would you just shut up and watch the show?
It's all right to find love as long as it's not with your spouse.
That's
You know.
that's what I've noticed a lot though in this industry. We've blurred again the lines of marriage and the longevity of marriage. People are getting married just to see if it's going to work out. I'm thinking, when I got married and I gave those vows, I gave them till death do us part, you know, which means I'm going to make it work out. You know, the difficulties, the struggles. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, this was a triumph in this movie, and you know, we have no choice. If we're gonna take a biblical look at marriage, we have to identify what happened in this television show as an absolute tragedy, absolutely a tragedy.
It is. It definitely it is. It's a tragedy to view love and marriage as two different things. That's what I've been seeing in a lot of scripts. And it's difficult because what do you tell them, you know? How do you as an actor say, I'm not going to play that part because that's what the audience is going to see. I'm very careful to play the parts that I feel like the audience is going to take a clean message out of, which it makes it even harder because out of 20 breakdowns, I might walk away with only 8. And it's hard. It's discouraging a lot. Because I feel like as an actor sometimes I'm being too picky, and I've been told that well, you know, you have to lower your standards, I've heard. And you know, you can't pick and choose so much, you're never going to work.
Wow.
I heard that.
So in this big TV show that you're looking at, so when scenes like that, you know, sultry, you're looking at, you know, the opening scene with your character would be a bikini scene, and there's some kissing scenes and things like that. Yet it's displaying like, okay, this is actually, we're looking at a temptress, we're looking at, you know, some with adulterous intents, and it's not being portrayed as a win for your character, and anybody who engages with your character in this way is not winning either. So you, as the potential actress for this role, you know, to conclude the thought, where do you go as the prospective candidate for this role? Do you apply for the role, or do you look at the?
I was submitted by this from an agent, which it wasn't even my own agent. That's why I said it fell in my lap. They came and they found me for that, and it had to do with my nationality. And I auditioned for the part. With the funny thing, what it was, which was even crazier, I was asked to sign an NDA. For those that don't know, non-disclosure agreement. Yeah, I was asked to sign an NDA before I even knew what the part was about. I was approached. I was asked to sign, and when I responded, it was an email, and I responded back, and I said, "Well, what am I signing for?" Because I'm really careful with my contracts. I have to read through every single word. I don't have a lawyer just yet, so I have to go through every single word and, you know, make sure I understand it. And if I don't, Google is my best friend, you know? So I was talking with my husband, and my husband was very apprehensive. He's like, "Well, baby," he's like, "we don't know what you're signing." I was like, "Well, here's the deal. The NDA says that I am signing for an audition. It was that I'm not supposed to talk about the part until the audition goes through and I find out what's going on because of the major channel and the major show." And we're like, okay, well, let's sign the NDA and see where this is going to go. I signed the NDA and I didn't hear back for at least 3 or 4 days. And the reason being is that I signed the NDA, the agent submitted me to the casting director, and the casting director had the choice to give me an audition or not. Which is kind of how it works. You know, you might be perfect for the role, but if the casting director doesn't want to see you, they're not going to see you. So they come back to me. It was a Sunday morning. They come back to me and they wanted me to go ahead and submit an audition, which means I knew I was in the run. And all of a sudden I see the breakdown. It was the first time I've even heard the name of the show. I've heard the channel name. I heard the co-star name. And I'm looking at it's a series regular, which, you're walking away with plus taxes, $30,000 an episode. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, good Lord. I'm all of a sudden looking at my student loans going down slowly. I'm looking at my bank account rising fast. And all I could see for a split second was $30,000 an episode and a big name next to me. And for a second, my Christian ethics were like, it was a moment of money, and I could tell you probably in my eyes you saw dollar signs. Anyway, I'm going through the description and I'm looking at the scenes for the first time. I'm looking at what they're requiring me, and it was a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. that I saw the text, and they wanted me to submit that scene in like literally less than 8 hours. I was supposed to memorize 4 scenes, about 3 pages each, and go put myself on tape and send the audition in less than 8 hours. I was like, first of all, this is insane. It's just not going to happen. Which by the way happens a lot. This industry goes like this. I get the script tonight. Tomorrow morning, I got to be in the casting director's office, So I'm looking at the script and I'm telling my husband, I'm looking at the first scene, first line. And it's the description of what the other person sees, which is a woman in her bathing suit walking out of a pool. And what his thought process is. And I don't know if you ever seen a script for television. It is very descriptive. They don't give the actor much of a freedom. That's television script writing. It's not the same as film. So, yes, they're telling him in the script, step by step. For instance, there was a line that said, that's what he admires about her. She said, and he laughed, because that's what he loves about her. That's exactly the description. Or the line was, and he's looking at her, young, beautiful, sexy, just how he remembered her. Because she's coming back from his past. Long story short, it's a very descriptive script. So I'm looking at it step by step, and I know where that lens is going to be. I just know it. I've done it too many times. I know where that lens is going to be. Because if where he's looking is her walking out of the pool, the lens is walking all the way from my feet to the top of my head. And it's pausing where he wants to pause, if you know what I mean. So I'm looking at it and going through that script, and it was a struggle. I have to know where it ends. And I'm looking at the second scene, I'm looking at the third scene, and the major scene, which I knew they were going to cast from that scene alone, was the kissing scene. And in that particular scene, without being able to tell a whole lot, he basically walks out on her. And she walks out with her tail between her legs. And it was very descriptive. And I thought to myself, okay, so she's paying the price. Every behavior she's putting on this page is paying the price. So looking at it again, going through the words, and I realized that because of her status in the movie or in the show, she wasn't going to have to do any nude, any sex scenes. It wasn't anything other than just kissing and manipulation and all that. I was like, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I did the audition. It took them 2.5 weeks to get back to me, which was a pain. It was very stressful. And it came back and I didn't get the part.
Oh.
I didn't get the part. And it was very disappointing because I'm still trying to find out who got the part.
Oh, sure.
I'm very I need to know who got it.
Yep.
Just so I'll know who bit me.
So I mean, you're going to be watching the episode, you'll be like, oh, her? Come on.
Exactly. I'm going to be watching the episode and be like, really? Really? But I have a friend here in the industry. She's a Christian. She's mostly a commercial actress, and that's what she does specifically. And we've been, we do a lot of kind of soul analysis together. We'll go through and say, why is it so hard for women in this industry? Or why being a Christian is so hard in this industry? And we'll pick our battles that way. Anyway, we are talking about it, and she kept saying, she goes, Steph, God shows you where he wants to take you. The $30,000 episodes and the major channel shows and this and that and that. And he just didn't have that part for you, and I was thinking to myself, and I was praying, and I was like, God, where I'm at financially you know where I'm at in my career, you know where I'm at in my spirit. I'm not just a warm the pew Christian. I try to live my life that way, where, I try to be very careful of how I speak on set. I'm a producer, which means on set I'm the boss sometimes. And the people I hire, I want them to see God through me. I'm not the kind of Christian that roams through Hollywood and bangs people on the head with the Bible, but it's so important to me that people see God in me. It's so important to me that I I speak Jesus than talk about Jesus. Does that make sense? So accepting a role like that would have been difficult, but would have been such a ministry because it's a huge set. It's not a indie movie. It's not a student film. I can't say the name of the channel, but it's a big channel.
Well, and you're a regular on the show, so you weren't just here one moment and you're gone the next.
Exactly.
You would have been,
It
yeah,
was
that
a
would have been powerful.
12 or so episode season. And it was just a huge ministry to me. And I kept praying about it. And I was like, God, why didn't I get it? Why didn't I get it? And God reminded me that what I think is big is not as big as God thinks. God reminds me sometimes that what we call important, not as important as we think. The things we put value in this industry are insane. And they rise up to the sky, explode like a firework, and they come back down. Nothing is left after that.
Well, it's really interesting. You brought up, another friend of yours who's an actress in Hollywood who's also a Christian. Now, what's interesting to me is that, and this is one of the, we just to let everybody else listening, we did have a chance to just kind of give Stephanie a little bit of background of what we were going to talk about. And one of the things that Rob came up with, which I think is very interesting, especially now talking with Stephanie for a few minutes, is that in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, they're telling us as the viewers, that these women who are like the character you might have played, these women who are, they're very sexual and they're very, that this is actually an empowering and independent thing. And so, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's actually the case?
It's not. They do tell us that for sure. They do tell us that. But looking around me in the industry, I have to tell you, I lived in the United States for about 8 years now, and I wasn't in LA the whole time. I moved in LA about 2 years ago, and I found, and I'm coming from the Bible Belt, okay, Cleveland, Tennessee. That's where I was for about 5 or so years. I found more Christians in Hollywood than I could ever imagine. There is Christian groups left and right. There is women's Christian Women's Association. There is in Hollywood where it's all about being a team and supporting each other as Christian women here. So we get together and we're like, it's insane what they think sells. It's what I was telling you earlier about what we give value to. But empowering women in that way, it's only in certain movies, if you notice. And as you mentioned earlier, family-friendly movies are selling as well. And they're selling more sometimes. Because what they tell us is that we have to do those things to sell. We have to do those things to book. We have to do those things to have a job. But when you're looking at the day-to-day jobs here, and when you're looking at a lot of Christian women are rising up and they're creating their own content, which is what I'm doing now. As a producer, I'm like, listen, if, 3 out of however breakdowns are sexy and they're asking me to take my clothes off, then I have to make my own thing because otherwise I'm not going to work. I don't want to be a part of their thing. So I got to do my own. Does that make sense? And I've seen a tremendous amount of actresses here rising up and taking the stage and creating their own content and creating a different kind of content. And not all of them are trying to send a message of, I'm a Christian, but all of them are trying to send a message of there's much more to a woman than just her body.
And I think that's very important because we actually did have another actress on the podcast a while back who kind of said the same thing. It's like there doesn't need to be, well, we're the Christian entertainment industry and we're the secular entertainment industry. There just needs to be the entertainment industry, but there need to be those actors and actresses in Hollywood or wherever that are Christians that go, you know what? I don't want to be a part of that game. Why can't we have our own game and put it in the mix that just doesn't have those things?
Exactly. But you know what also I find it intriguing is the people that are in this industry and they're not Christians and they see and work with Christians, they will come up to us and say, you're so different than what I expected. And I guess what they pay attention to, and I've been told from people, is the fact that we don't use language. Try to be on set and use a walkie-talkie. There is more cursing than actual lingo. The fact that we don't use language, the fact that we don't sleep around in the backstage, because that happens as well. The fact that we don't gossip, we don't speak bad about other people, and that is what they're looking for in us, as Christians, to see the difference. And working with us, it doesn't mean that we're banging them on the head with the Bible, like I said, or with pushing that content down their throat. It's important. They see in us the need to create something that applies to a different audience, that's not looking to satisfy a sultry need. That it's okay for the whole family to sit down on the couch and watch it, even if it has aliens coming from outer space. You know what I mean? Like, even if it has the crazy storylines, I don't have to shove sex down their throats. And it's amazing to me how people tell me, sex is normal, being sexy is normal, is a part of real life. If we know anything about film history, and trust me, I studied that quite a bit in grad school, the Lumiere brothers that created, that started the whole film industry, they said this is a dying art. They expected the movie industry to die a month into it. Why? Because they said life is boring. That's why we make movies, because life is boring. And then somebody comes along and tells me sex isn't part of life, so let's put it in a movie. But life is boring. That's why you go make movies with Avengers and you make movies with Iron Man, because you want to see something out of this life. Why in the world would you take something from this life that is supposed to be sacred, and it's supposed to be so godly, and supposed to be so a marriage covenant thing, and you're putting it in a movie for everyone to watch? You're taking what you call boring, which is life, putting it in a movie that you think it's extraordinary and it's out of life, and you're saying it's normal. Those things to me contradict each other. So I'm loving seeing people that are striking to make a difference, and they're striking to make stories that don't have sex, which is what I'm trying to do with some of the work I'm doing right now. It's telling women that you can be a lady. You can be much more than just a toy in somebody's hands, because that sells.
Okay, so as your career, that's part of your focus. That was actually one of the questions we were going to ask. That beauty and sexuality don't have to go hand in hand. Oh, let me even rephrase that to get a little more specific. Beauty and exploitation of sexuality don't need to go hand in hand. We can define femininity apart from sexuality. So as you're if you in whatever success you have in getting movie roles, TV roles, and things like that, you have an opportunity to spread this message in the way you live, and in opportunities to visit with people. What do women need to understand about their appearance and how they present themselves? Distinguish the difference between godly femininity and exploited sexuality.
I love that question, because I was actually looking at it when you sent it to me last night, and I was thinking to myself, my goodness, I said, that is like, it's going to take hours to answer that, because it's such a subject. But I realized one thing in this industry. We are told as women that in order for a man to look at us, we have to be naked. It's funny, but it's clear. They tell it all the time. We've been told in this industry that in order to book a job, we have to show some skin. For instance, I was sitting in a casting workshop, and I take those a lot. I get to build relationships with casting directors, and I love that. But they're telling us the kind of 101, okay? How do your headshot needs to look, what you need to wear in auditions, how your hair needs to be for particular roles. I mean, it's so nitpicky. And one of the rules, let's just call it a rule, for the clothing is for women to show their legs. Because, yes, they say if you're going to go in for particular roles, you need to make sure that they can see your leg, especially the back of your leg where the muscles are. because I can tell your what's the word I'm looking for? Like, your resilience. Like, can you work? Can you run? Can you do the stunts? Are you able, And then is showing the parts of your skin that sell, or the parts of your skin that you can show that can sell. So it's important for a woman to show her legs. And I hear that in modeling as well.
See, what this sounds like to me, it almost sounds like you're going to a dog show and they're judging you. It's almost like they're like, let's look at her mouth here. Oh, yes, okay. Let's check out her legs. And, because I mean, it just seems more, it seems like less like we're hiring someone who's going to be great for this part, who's going to be able to emote and who's going to be able to memorize their lines. It's less like that. They're just like, what you gonna, what can you do like 19 jumping jacks on a trampoline wearing absolutely nothing? Can you do that? Because that's what we're looking for here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the crazy thing is, if you've ever been to an audition, and I've been on the casting side as well, and I have to ask for that, and I'm like, I hate this. You'll ask for an actor to turn profile. So you'll stand first for the camera to look at your face, and then profiles, turn to the right and turn to the left. They have to look at your neck, your hair is up. They got to make sure. It's crazy. They're looking at you like you're a dog. And
so your talent for the role, your ability to portray the emotion and be believable in
that
the role,
comes like second.
That's later.
Oh yeah.
You got to get past the visual
Pretty
first.
much. Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
Pretty much. Because when you look at a casting breakdown, usually says the age range at first. For instance, with the show I'm doing right now called Lady. And for the part that I'm playing Dana. And the description, the breakdown, I mean, I'm the producer, so I didn't put a breakdown for that, but the breakdown would say Dana, 30s, brunette, tall, no taller than 5'6", and sometimes they will give you a weight range as well. And from there, it would say the description of what the character is about. But it started that way. 30s, it would give you an age range. So it's 30s to 40s or 20s to 30s. And then it would usually say brunette, blonde. Some specifics that I've seen lately say blue-eyed. They need specific eye color. If you're going in for commercials, they will sometimes specify shoe size, clothing size, depending what you're going in for. Modeling, they need to know your bust size, your hip size, your inseam, your hat size, your glove size. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow, do they need a urine sample too, or?
Yeah, it's very, and
Jeepers.
because I'm in every spectrum,
Wow.
I can tell you, as a model, as a plus size model, I go in, and when I get the description from my agent from plus size modeling, they're very specific. For instance, I used to be a 14 when I first came in the industry, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I mean, that's who I am, and that's why I look. Every photo you see, that's how I am. So when I first came into LA about 2 years ago, it was right when I was starting grad school, and I was a size 14. And I went to my very first audition, and I had 3 women. One is taking my measurement, the other one is putting clothes on me, and the other one is writing down. But they're all so close to me, okay, which makes me extremely uncomfortable because there are 3 women pulling things out of my body. And then there's another woman on the other side of the office screaming on top of her lungs, yelling at me, saying, "Are you fitting for anybody else?" Which means, are you working for somebody else? And I was like, I didn't understand what that meant. It was my first time as a model. And I was like, fitting, I'm here, I'm fitting for you. What are you asking? She kept saying, "Are you fitting for anybody else?" And I said, "No." I said, "This is my first time." And I'm like nervous, I didn't even know what was going on. And angrily, she turned around and goes, "Okay, fine then," and walked away. Long story short, she basically told me I'm not big enough. I get in the car and I'm driving home and I'm on the craziest freeway in LA, but I'm calling my agent and I'm like, "So I'm not fat enough." That's what I told her. I was like, I'm 14. She goes, "Yeah, well, you're 14. That means you're not on 1X, and 1X is the plus size category." And I'm thinking, but 14 is healthy. I'm not small, but I'm not fat. Like, I'm not big. It's insane. I was mind blown. Like, what was going on? And I'm talking about standing there and people pulling clothes out of me and putting clothes on me. And one is trying to put a measuring tape around my waist. It was insane. I was very scared. That was my first modeling audition. And as I'm going and I'm in grad school and I'm stressed out of my mind, I'm gaining weight. And I'm gaining weight unintentionally. I'm gaining weight intentionally. I wasn't necessarily careful. I was on set. I went to a school that works out of the back lot of Universal Studios. So I was on the back lot of Universal Studios literally every day. And that's 10, 12-hour days. And that's going home, memorizing a different scene for the next day. That's grad school when it's hands-on. So I'm gaining weight, and I walk out of grad school 6 months ago. I graduated, and I'm a size 16. And I got called in again for an audition. I'm driving downtown LA, the financial district, and I'm putting on the first pair of jeans, and I walk out. And the lady looks at me, and I turn around, because they're supposed to take pictures, front and profiles. And I look at me, and I turn around, and she goes, "Well, you have a nice butt."
You're like, "Thank you?"
And I go, "Thanks. That's flattering. I feel so much better about myself now."
Yeah, if I had a nickel, for every time somebody said, no, not at all.
You wouldn't have a nickel.
I would not have a nickel, not one.
But yeah, that was the first comment I get. And all of a sudden, this other lady comes in and basically pulls the pants from my crotch. She's trying to smoothen the jeans on me so the picture will look smooth. And I understand that because it happens, but it was just an awkward movement.
You're like, "Just so you know, I do have these little hands right here next to me. That can ask. You can ask. I can adjust my own jeans, thank you. You don't have to be. Hello, denim devil woman. Back away."
It was indeed an awkward movement. Wow. But in the modeling industry, people put clothes in, all the time. Like, I'm sitting in the makeup chair sometimes, and they're doing makeup, someone is doing hair, and they're pulling you at the two different directions at the same time. And we're used to it, and we don't think about it twice. Even in modeling auditions like that, I'm okay to tell me I have a nice bottom. I don't care, as long as it looks good in your jeans and you can give me the job, But we reach the point where we become numb on those things, and we forget that we don't need to be offended, first of all. And some people are not really doing it out of malice. They're really not. It's a part of their job. They need to make sure that you fit right in those jeans, and they need to make sure that you look good for them to give you the job. They need to make sure that you can sell that, and it sounds wrong if you think about it, but it is the nature of the beast. You're going to go buy a pair of jeans and you're looking at them at the model and you're like, well, if it looks like crap on her, why would I buy it for me?
Right. So not everybody that you're dealing with has the desire to exploit.
No, they're really not. And I've noticed that, they're not all going for that. And in the modeling industry, especially for plus size models, it feels like there is a certain sense of, I'm not going to call it respect, because it's not just respect. There is a sense of, oh my gosh, girl, you're big, but you have the guts to stand in front of this camera, And I find it almost rewarding sometimes, when you go in an audition, the first audition, and people are yelling at you and they're saying you're not big enough, to going into the second audition and she's looking at you in a clothing that she put on you. And her first comment is, you have a cute butt, or, you have a nice butt. The first thought in your head is, that's a compliment, and not the fact that you're looking at my bottom,
Well,
Right.
it sounds like to me like, and I think for any young woman out there or older woman, whatever, who wants to pursue acting or modeling, the thing that I'm hearing a lot here is it's the polar opposite. It's not being sexual or being nude that's empowering. It's being who you are and being yourself. That's the empowering part.
Yes, so much. But also, what I was going to add to the question that you asked me earlier about, beauty and sexuality and all that. Sometimes, as women, we create these sort of definitions and these sort of groups we want to call feminist and this and that. And we all have our definitions that go along with those words. And we all have our beliefs that go along with those words. But one of my personal beliefs when it comes to the particular definition, and when it comes to the definition of a woman a beautiful woman, and if you want to call it, a sexually beautiful woman, it comes from the Bible. And it's, for me, as clear as the sun in the day from the Bible. In Proverbs 31, it says a wife of a noble character, but I'm going to translate it and call it a woman of a noble character. It talks about how she's dressed in scarlet and in beautiful linens. It talks about how she takes care of herself and her house. It talks about a woman that does business. It talks about a woman that works with her hands, and is describing a very well balanced, beautiful woman, you know? And to me, it's clear. To me, it's an instructional, clear manual what a woman needs to be.
See, and that's awesome. I think she's pretty much hitting right on the head. We're actually running a little short on time, but this has been really awesome talking with Stephanie. But I know we did have one more question, I believe, Rob. Had.
I would like an answer on this last question. We actually are constrained on time here. We actually have to cut Ben loose here in just a couple minutes. But can you help men, our male listeners, and then ourselves as men? How can we affirm feminine beauty in healthy, credible, and innocent ways?
Let me think. Well, let me give you an example, if I may, then. Sometimes I will put on a dress, or if I go on shopping with my husband, I will put on a dress and I'll walk out, and he would say, "You look beautiful." And then I will walk past him and I will feel, his hand on my back, or he's kind of trying to compliment the way I look. And I know that he thinks a lot more than just the way I look. He's my husband. He's allowed. And I'm realizing the need for women to feel beautiful past the way and past what men think beyond that. So if a man looks at a woman and all he thinks is sex, the problem begins on how he expresses it. It doesn't just stay there. Like, a woman knows that a man is going to think about her sexually, for crying out loud, especially if it's your own husband sometimes. It's natural. That's the point when it comes to your husband. When it comes to viewers on television, that they're watching a movie to see if he has sex, that's where the problem begins, because they're going looking for that, And I'm always amazed by people that watch a movie. And I have Christian male friends in the industry. One of my really good friends, he's partnering with me in my company. He's my writer. He's a male, and he's a married male. And we're writing scenes together. And we're writing scenes in a show that's all about women, So I'm looking at the way he thinks, and the way he processes things. And we're talking about movies that we like a lot. And I love the way he always describes it, because he will describe characters. And I mean, yeah, he's a writer, so it's different, but he describes characters beyond sexuality. He describes characters, and we're watching movies, and he would look at the sex and be like, that just totally took me out of the movie. It put me in that place where I need to be with my wife. So I feel like when men are going and watching those kind of movies and they are looking for that and they're asking that, the industry is going to give them that. They're rewarding them. So I feel like when we go and watch movies that don't have that, we need to reward that. And when a movie does have that, trust me, everyone's on the internet and everyone makes comments and everyone writes a review. Write your review and depict that scene. Tell this industry that that's not what I went to watch the movie for.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
I think that's exactly right. Well, I do apologize to everyone and Stephanie. We'd love to talk with her longer. We do have a little bit of a time constraint this afternoon, but I do want everybody to know, if you want to know what's going on with Stephanie and what role she's pursuing, or what whatever's going on, do you want to go ahead and give them some information where they can kind of find out where you are and what's going on?
We haven't given your full name yet.
That's
either,
true. We didn't have any yeah, and actually we kind of didn't say your last name just in case it was pronounced differently. How do you pronounce your last name?
My last name is Bodkin.
Okay, so it is exactly, okay, so Stephanie Bodkin, that's exactly
That's
what.
right.
See, we just didn't know because you don't want to like say somebody's last name and they're like, it's actually.
My name gets mispronounced all the time, by the way.
It's true.
Oh, I bet.
It's true. Rob's last name is Royce, and it looks like Roisy or like.
Oh, that's funny.
It looks like
a car.
yeah, it looks like Boise with an R. So
Right.
it's like, but no, yeah.
You guys got my first name right, which is great.
Nice.
There
I
you
had
go.
a lot of difficulty with that.
Good for us.
Well, so
Funny
so now
enough.
that we actually do know your last name, Stephanie, where can people go to find out what's going on with you?
Yeah, I have my personal website, which I post everything as an actor and a model. That's stephaniebodkin.com. And then my production company is Bodkin Pictures. So bodkinpictures.com, you can find everything I'm working on right now, which is my newest web series called Lady, which has to do with women, which is one of my projects that I'm fundraising right now and everything. So yeah, bodkinpictures.com for my work as a producer and stephaniebodkin.com for my work as an actress and a model.
Okay, and then just to let everybody know, it is spelled Stefanie,
That's right.
and Bodkin Bodkin.
That's right.
So definitely, you guys, we've got a Christian actress here who's out there trying to do her thing, and she's doing it
Yes.
on God's terms,
That's
not
right.
the industry's terms. So, go out there, support her, check out the websites and what she's doing, and we just appreciate you being on the podcast.
We really do.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you so much.
But we thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll get together next week and give you another episode. So I'm Ben Knight.
I'm Rob Royce.
Mr. Peanut always bothered me. A peanut with a monocle and a top hat. Never saw a cashew with a sports coat and a cane.